But Thomas Power, if you didn't know, was the founder or co-founder of something called eCademy. Do you remember eCademy? And actually that was a business networking site that was started 5 years before LinkedIn even came on the scene. So Thomas Power got there first and set up his business and grew it and did all sorts of interesting things with that and became the biggest part of social media right at the start and the foundation of it. And Thomas today advises major companies, he helps CEOs and directors with their strategy on social media and all sorts of things like that. So I'm really interested to hear what he has got to say today about the future of social media and where it's going for us in small business. So we're excited to have Thomas here. So would you help me welcome Thomas Power, please?
Thank you. Thank you, good morning. Lovely introduction. Am I on for your tape? Great. And there's no tape even in the machine, is there?
Shows you age.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm 51, so I guess I'm old. Do make sure you read Nicky's Twitter book, because Twitter is the most important platform for you to become skilled at. The most important by a long, long way. If you think of it in terms of languages, learning Twitter is like learning French, and even the French struggle with French, as I'm sure you know. Facebook is more like Spanish, and LinkedIn is more like German. But the most important one to learn, and the hardest one to learn, is Twitter. But enough on that. Nicky would like me to tell you the story of success and failure and comeback. So it's always nice to have a success, but it's very hard to recover from a failure. And that process takes you a long time and takes you to a dark place to come out of it. But going back to 1994, in fact, I'm now in my 21st year online, and studying the world of online still fascinates me hugely to this day. I read for 4 hours a day, every day, 7 days a week, 100 hours a month, just to keep abreast of the developments in Silicon Valley. And the pace and assault that's coming at the UK market from Silicon Valley is mesmerizing. Many of the commentators and believers consider that 75 of the FTSE 100 won't make it to 2025. And if you go back to the dot-com boom of March 2000, which you may remember, Martha and Brent floated lastminute.com on March the 13th, year 2000, 15 years ago next week. That was the collapse of the dot-com. Theirs was the last IPO. And since, in the last 15 years, 40 of the FTSE 100 haven't made it to this point. 40 out of the last 15 years, which means that the best directors in the country cannot even compete in the modern world. And so now, when I tell you about what's coming next from Silicon Valley, it's truly, truly terrifying. Internet Armageddon is upon us. And having been through Internet Armageddon, I'll tell you my little story of how it happened to me. So Penny and I began eCademy in February 1998 in Pizza Express in Farnham. She had this idea about building the Institute of E-commerce, education, training, networking, this kind of stuff. And I quite liked this idea. I was working for a US software company out of Walnut Creek in California called Commerce One, run by Mark Hoffman, who was the founder of Sybase. And I took the plane after that Saturday. That was the 7th of February 98. That was a Saturday. I took the plane to Walnut Creek on the Monday. I came back on the Thursday, and I had the name eCademy from sitting looking at The Economist on the plane home, Economist, Institute of E-commerce, Economist, Institute of E-commerce, Economist, Institute of E-commerce, eCademy. And that's where the name was born, Academy, eCademy. Registered the name getting off the plane, and we launched it later that year. And it was phenomenally difficult. People didn't know what business networking was then. People didn't know what social networking was then. We couldn't get the support of pretty much all the VCs, but we did go out and raise a lot of money privately. We raised, over 2 nights, I raised £840,000 with some high net worth individuals in the City of London, just on the day they got their bonuses. So on that February the 28th, if you don't know, that's when they all receive their money. I got to them on the Thursday the 27th and the Friday the 28th. In 2 nights, walked out with £840,000 worth of cheques, which I banked the next morning. But that wasn't enough money to fund a social network. For those of you who don't know, the amount of money that went into Facebook with Mark's business, who I know well, was $2.7 billion pre the IPO. 38% of that came out of Russia. $2.7 billion of capital to get Facebook to the point of break even. That's nearly £2 billion just to get Facebook to break even. So we had this 840,000, then I did family, friends, mum, dads, aunts, uncles, got another 550,000. We're up to 1.3 million, enough to hire a tech team, build out the network, build the servers and so on, but still not enough money. Those of you who will remember, the banks were not that good online in those days, in 99, 2000, 2001. So I started borrowing money online without meeting any human beings. Not some money, but quite a lot of money, which the banks to this day still don't understand how I did it. But it was 104 credit cards with £10,000 each on them. That's 104 times £10,000, because there's some bugs in a lot of the systems back then at Equifax and Experian, which I noticed on a lookup table. And then another 25, another 52, £25,000 loan. So that's £2.6 million worth of online lending without meeting a human being. So you can see how the global financial crisis became inevitable from Northern Rock in August 2007. And I like to think I did quite a good number on Northern Rock myself. In those days, there were 161 bank accounts. I had all 161. The biggest problem in my life was my usernames and passwords, which we all know with banks are a nightmare. So we had about £3.5 million worth of working capital, £3.5 million, Facebook, $2.7 billion. Bear in mind, Facebook was not born then. We launched, we got underway by the spring of the year 2002, we had about 10,000 members, and the service was free. And Glenn, our CEO, super guy, very good friends to this day, he said, I think we can get people to pay for this service. And what was the service really? It was physical events, and it was blogging and groups and networking. It was very primitive. It was very basic, nothing like you could do now, and certainly nothing on mobile. And if you look at the scale of the mobile investment at somewhere like Facebook and Twitter, and to put it in context of just the mobile app at Facebook, just the mobile app at Facebook has 8,000 software engineers on just that one part of the offering now. So you have to think of the scale and the difficulty and the complexity of building these things on mobile. So on December the 7th, 2002, we launched a subscription service. It was £10 a month, and we were very excited because we got someone to pay on the first day. And his name was Leon Benjamin. He's still a very good friend because he's the first person who ever gave me a tenner on PayPal. And I bought him a lot of lunch ever since. By the end of that month, December 2002, that's right, we had 36 subscribers paying £10 a month. I was very excited. I was very, very excited. That was December 2002 when those 36 people gave us that £10 note. That was the first month I met a guy called Reid Hoffman from LinkedIn. And I joined the LinkedIn network and thought, this looks interesting. Reid at that time had about $10 million of capital just on the idea of LinkedIn. And that was the first time where I started to become nervous. Wow, you can get $10 million with just an idea. You don't even need a website or a brochure. So anyway, time went on. By the end of 2003, we had about 1,500 people paying us £10 a month. By the end of 2004, we had nearly 5,000. By the end of 2005, we had 22,000. So 22,000 people paying £10 a month. You can see it's a nice business. And a very, very nice business it was. And we were doing round about 100 events a week in 5,000 different events a year. Penny and I visited 60 countries. Our kids thought we had a travel company because they've been to so many places where they're tiny tots. And obviously they can never remember it now when they're grown up, as bloody kids are like, as we know. So then, of course, during that time, we saw the emergence of LinkedIn really in the spring of 2003, Facebook February the 4th, 2004, and Twitter begun April the 6th, 2006, and the birth of the free model. Everything is free. And of course, our perception is that these things are free. But when you look at your phone bill, particularly the data bill on your phone that you are paying to O2, to Orange, to 3, to Vodafone, that is the money going to those companies. Those services are not free. You're just paying them indirectly through your phone bill. And a lot of people forget that. So the perception of free is a very good illusion that the guys at Facebook, Twitter and LinkedIn and Google have truly mastered. Notice now that Google have now launched their mobile phone network in the United States. So they're coming for that bit as well. And they do intend to take all of it. They're not interested in some of it. These guys in California, they don't want a bit of market share, they want all of the market. Which is why when they launch their predatory attack on the FTSE 100, it's going to be very, very painful. And I will be there standing, trying to defend the kingdom, sitting on their boards, firing the weapons. So I've learnt my lesson. Anyway, so we got up to, by 2006, we had 650,000 members. It was huge. And in came that incredible offer of nearly 20 million pounds. That, of course, we turned down. Front page of the second page 2 on the Telegraph. Oh, we're so confident. It was you know what they say? Intel inside, idiot outside. So huge error. Second offer came in, turned it down. Third offer came in, turned it down. And obviously we were experts then in stupidity. As time goes on, by 2011, the free model of Facebook, Twitter and LinkedIn had decimated Academy, absolutely decimated. And we sold it for the princely sum of £1 in 2011. So, starts well, gets really exciting, really exciting, and ends in disaster. And that's the life of being on the cutting edge of the technology industry and trying to fight the American companies. I now sit on many American company boards and I don't fight them, I eat their dog food, since their dog food is good quality and pays well. But you cannot beat the Americans on the internet, so don't try. And I was foolishly trying to beat them. I no longer attempt to do that. But of course, the downside of failure and having to sell something for £1 is that you have to recover. And what was very interesting then is the dark place you go into, because you go from this very high profile position into a very depressed state. A very depressed state. A very dark place. An awfully dark place, which I try not to remember anymore. And it's a long way back. A long way back. And then you start to consider your options, and I'm sure you understand what I mean. And you're starting then to figure out how on earth are you going to come back from this situation. Now, some of the upsides of the spin-offs around Academy was the fact I did put a lot of effort into Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn and Google Plus to study their models and to study their software and to understand how they worked in order to apply their techniques to Academy. But not having the resources and the capital and the skills to compete meant we could only pick out some of the features to add. But it did mean that I got a high profile on Facebook and Twitter, LinkedIn and Google Plus because I put so much effort into them. And one of those was part of the recovery, because on LinkedIn I'm number 73 in the world, but I'm number 1 in the UK. And being number 1 in the UK on a platform of that scale matters a lot in California. And as a result, that's why I get invited to join various different boards. So that was a sort of a blessing in disguise, if you like, from studying a platform. Also on Twitter, nearly 100,000 followers, most of which are the Academy members that felt sorry for me because we went. Okay, so probably of that 650,000 members, of my 90-odd thousand followers on Twitter, probably 10% of that 650,000 are Academy members feeling sorry for me, so thank you if you are one of those. But Twitter has been a very, very powerful comeback vehicle for me as well. So the power of the platforms is not just the branding power or the marketing power or the e-commerce power or the chat power, the discussion power of these platforms. They're actually very good for physical and mental recovery as well. So they're more than just bits of software. They're very, very sophisticated pubs, particularly Twitter, which is by far the most sophisticated pub on the internet and takes many years to learn, many, many years to learn. So whilst you can study it in the book and go on the courses, you have to give yourself time to understand how the Twitter pub works. And by the end of the decade, it will be the dominant platform. And it will be your dominant route to market. So if you don't study it, whether it's for suppliers or clients, for staff or shareholders, it's a weakness. And it's a dangerous weakness to have in your portfolio, to not understand how it works. So the other interesting thing is how you come back from the dark place. And so I was unemployed. That was the first time in my life. I was unemployed for about a year, and that was pretty tough. And that's when you realise you have to work to survive, and not working, particularly for a man who are hunters, is very, very painful. Fortunately, during that time, my wife she decided to pull out of Academy much earlier than me. I fought right to the end, foolishly, to try and rescue it. But she started building something new called the Digital Youth Academy, which took off and continues to take off. So all respect to her for doing that. So I took up that very silly obsession that people have called the spinning class at the David Lloyd Centre. I'm sure you're very familiar with those obnoxious people that go so excited about spinning, they tell you all about it all the time. I became one of those. Revolting I was. So spinning was part of the physical recovery that the doctors and psychologists recommend to get myself physically back, because I'd got caught up in too much booze, overeating and all those sorts of things as part of the Academy decline. And you've got to get through those as well. So I took up the spinning class, became obsessed with spinning, doing it 4 or 5 times a week, talking to everyone about spinning. The world is about the spinning class. And then going onto YouTube and seeing those obnoxious people, thinking, I'm one of those obnoxious, revolting people who does a spinning class. Anyway, so on it went, and my mother said to me, she said, do you know, if you do too much of that spinning thing, I'm sure it won't be good for you. 85 years of wisdom there from my mother who'd been through the Second World War. She said, I think you should just do it once or twice a week. Oh no, Mum, you don't understand. It's all part of my recovery. And of course, what happened was during the process of getting fit, I then started to have some opportunities to work for some companies, and I was at Moorgate train station, and my appendix burst. But worse than that, it was a necrotic appendix, which is like the worst type, where the poison is leaking into your body, and you are effectively dying. And I realised at that point that I was actually dying, and I collapsed on the ground in Finsbury Square there, next to Moorgate, on the grass, and I couldn't get up. And I was face down. And my BlackBerry was flat. And it was about 4:30 on a Friday afternoon. You know what they say about going to the NHS on a weekend? That information is accurate. So I sent a I was asking people if they could ring an ambulance for me, and nobody would stop to do that. I asked if I could use their phone for me to ring an ambulance, and nobody would stop to do that. And during that 4:30 and 5:15, about 1,500 people walked past me. And I had a big lesson that moment in where's your network now? Because I couldn't communicate. Fortunately, in my bag was my iPad, which was still on. And on that iPad was Apple's iMessage, and I sent a message to my son and said, emergency, can you get an ambulance to this postcode? To which my son replied, OK Jack, thinking I was Jack Bauer doing a 24 game with him. And so I've been on the ground 45 minutes. I start to realise I'm in trouble, and all of the conversation you have with yourself in the dark place is then compressed into that moment where this event, with this outcome you've considered, is then put into a reality situation, and you're asked then to choose. At that point, I was deteriorating very, very fast, and I would say I'd have probably been gone by about 6 o'clock. But my son, I replied to him saying, send this message to your sister. He sent that message to my daughter. She was at Warwick University. She called the ambulance from there, and they were going round and round Finsbury Square trying to find me, but I was lying down, so they couldn't see me in the ambulance. So it actually got to me about 5:45, and anyway, they managed to get me into a state where I could recover. And then I spent about 2 weeks in hospital recovering from that very, very dangerous situation, most of which was getting the poison out from the leak. But that was my moment where I was given the choice about the white place and the dark place, if you like. So I'm sure you can figure that out. And that moment was kind of there was my mother saying, if you do too much of that, you know what's going to happen. And then that was the moment of recovery, because coming into the hospital the next morning was Daniel Priestley, who's one of the people who came to see me, and also was the guy who bought Academy for £1. Because it wasn't just £1, it was £1 and all the debts that he bought. And he said to me, he said, TP, he said, you haven't been depressed. You've been in deep rest. Well, I cannot tell you the significance of that sentence he said to me in hospital when I was recovering on that Tuesday, Wednesday from that situation. Deep rest. And as I do a lot of that kind of counselling now for other executives who reach that dark place, pro bono, because I like to support people who go to that place, because it happens to a lot of executives who get to the top of a mountain and have nowhere else to tread, particularly in the UK FTSE 100, where high performance is expected and it's part of their psyche, but you can pass a point where you cause injury to yourself through your physical pushing yourself beyond your ability without recovery time. So I had the event of the burst appendix, the necrotic appendix. Daniel saying the deep rest, and deep rest was very, very powerful because it allowed me to consider the fact that that whole year was just a period of sleep. 5 minutes to stop. Okay, right, good. So I've done the dark place bit. Yeah, you wanted that. So then comes the recovery. Then comes the recovery piece, and my friend Bob Barker, who's one of the Academy members, been an Academy member, knows Beju very well. Lovely, lovely guy, very earthy, very churchy, very goddy, all those kind of things, complete opposite to me. He phoned me about 3 or 4 weeks after that appendix situation. It took me about 6 months to recover by Christmas from the appendix, a lot longer than I thought. I haven't been to a spinning class since, as it happens. I've gone back to my tennis, which is my core sport as a child, which I now play twice a week. He said to me, I've had a phone call from Peter, who's the marketing director at Accenture. And he said, I said, yeah, okay. He said he wants us to teach them how to use LinkedIn at Accenture. And I said, what, is that some kind of joke? And he said, no, they'll pay for it. I thought, I said, how much will they pay for that? He said, they'll pay £350 an hour. I said, I'll do it. So I effectively had the birth of a new job. I've now been at Accenture for 2 years, teaching every executive at the organisation, 369 now it happens. I'm sure you can work out how many hours that is over 2 years. But what I've learnt is that very experienced high-performing executives can't use social media. And also don't have any context around it, even why they should even learn it. And treat it very much as like golf. It's something I'll learn when I'm retired. But also because they have such good pension programs and high-paid performance salaries, arguably they don't need it because they've got old clout, called the Black Book, called Oxford and Cambridge, and most of their business revolves around Oxford and Cambridge and that Black Book. And they're not really panicking yet about the scale of the social assault coming from California because they don't really see it. They don't really sense it. But switching into the new world about where we're going next, the reason the Internet Armageddon is upon us, and that's why I've now joined 7 boards of directors as a non-executive in California, in New Zealand and in Europe, is because the venture capitalists in California, of which there's 250 of them, and they've all got more than $10 billion of capital to invest. So 250 times 10 billion, you can see how big a number that is. They've decided that they don't just want to sell us technology anymore and mousetraps and shovels, as they have done for the last 50 years. They actually want to take the markets away from the existing incumbents. So when you sit through a venture capitalist pitch now, and if you think of the one that Travis does at Uber, here is the Uber pitch from Travis. So, how many cities are there in the world of more than 1 million people? Question 1. Anybody know the answer to that question? Nobody does. It's actually 1,000. You wouldn't know that there were 1,000 cities in the world of more than 1 million people. How many taxis operate in those 1,000 cities? 10,000 taxis operate in each of those cities. Okay. What's the total revenue of those 10,000 taxis in those 1,000 cities? It is $500 billion US, $10 billion US a week of total revenue. To put that in context, that's the total size of the global advertising market, $500 billion US, of which Google have 70 billion of that 500 billion. So when Travis then pitches this with Peter Thiel, recommend you read his book, 0 to 1, phenomenal publication that he's put out there, because he's sort of written the predatory manual of how Big Co is going to be assaulted. Not just assaulted but annihilated. They look at that market of $500 billion and they say, right, so how much of that could we get? And they say, well, I think we could get half, $250 billion. Now, to put that in context, that's more than the current turnover of even Apple. And Apple is the biggest company in the world now, as I'm sure you're aware. And then they work out the cost of the capital to get to the $250 billion of revenue. In other words, how much capital would it take to get 50% market share of the global taxi market? And in the United States, if you look at all the dot-com models, without exception, for every dollar of revenue, you need $1 of equity or $1 of debt. In every single situation, if you check them all. And I've studied all of them for the last 21 years. But even getting to the point where they capture that market share, because Uber is now doing $1 billion US a month of revenue, starting in 2009. You think of how hard it is to do £1 million of revenue in the UK, or £10 million of revenue in the UK. This is $1 billion a month of revenue already after just 5 years. The goal, of course, is not to just take the revenue out of the taxi market. The goal, of course, is to take the taxes away completely and replace them with Google cars, which do not require drivers. No taxi drivers at all are required. If you haven't been in a Google car yet, it runs remotely on radar. It doesn't require humans. It's linked to the Google mapping system, and it'll run around a city on its own, and you'll call it on your Uber app and it'll be there outside your door in 10 minutes. You will not have a requirement for a car anymore in a city. You just call it, mount and go. And obviously the other interesting thing, of course, is the car, the vehicle and the ride will be free, because inside that car will be running the Google ads, which then allow you to make the product for free. So it's not just the taxi that is at threat, it's not just the income to the governments that are at threat, it's also the motor industry that is being assaulted, because in cities you then have the opportunity to replace all the cars with obviously eco battery based cars for free. So you don't need any tax, any insurance. You don't need a vehicle in a city. Of course, that frees up something else, which is the land where the cars are. Okay, in all the car parks. Guess who's buying the land? And you start to see the scale of the assault, because they start with something and then they work it all the way to the end. They work out the cost of capital, and they ask 3 questions at the VCs. Who are you going to kill? How much is it going to cost? And can you hire the assassins to do the work? That is the Silicon Valley business model. That's in Peter's book. That's probably enough for now. Thank you, I'm out of time.